Hey there, this is ArtFX and you're watching a video for bassgorilla.com. I'm here today to teach you something about sound design, and we're going to be looking at Neurofunk drum and bass basslines. I've got a little bit of a project here that I've set up. It's really simple. I just have a drum loop and a MIDI clip right now. For this particular bass sound we're going to be using X4 Records Serum, and we're also going to be using Isotope Trash 2 for the distortion. So without further ado, let's get to it. So I have a drum loop right here and it sounds like this. So it's really simple. It's just a drum and bass drum loop and it sounds very dirty, very heavy. There's one thing that I want to change here, and I want to add a slight variation on the end here, so that we have that. Now let's loop this section so that we can work on this, and we have a little bit of a MIDI clip here. Now I prepared this MIDI clip and I'm just going to show you what I've done. So we're working in the root key of F for this bass line, so you can see we have mostly F notes going on, and for one note I'm moving up to a F sharp, which is a one semitone change. So this would mean that this is actually written in the F Phrygian mode. Now I'm not going to go too much into detail about modes and scales and stuff like that. Look it up on the internet. It's pretty easy, pretty simple to understand. But that one semitone change really gives it a nice, interesting character, and a little bit of a aggressive sounding character, especially for Neurofunk bassline. So that's why I like it a lot. And I'm doing the same thing right here in the end, where I'm going up, and I'm just gonna play you this. So this is just the default Serum patch. So that's what we have. It sounds really simple and it's nothing like a drum and bass bassline. So let's go into Serum. The first thing you should know, a drum and bass bassline is called a Reese bass, and a Reese bass is usually made with two detuned saw waves and running those through a filter and some distortion. And that's exactly what we're going to do, but we're going to take it a little bit further and we're going to actually dive in and make something like a proper drum and bass Reese. So the first thing you want to do, and that is set up the first oscillator, and that will be 2 saw waves. So I'm going to set the unison here to 2. Now that means, as we can see, we now have 2 voices, and that's just going to make sure that we have 2 of the same waveform playing. If I bring the detune all the way down, it's just going to be the same thing, just a little bit louder. Now another thing I want to do is I want to bring the octave down. So we're now in the bass range. And then I want to bring the detuning up. And that creates some movement. Now, the thing with drum and bass basslines is right now the movement is there, and there is some movement going on because of the detuning, which creates phase cancellation. But the movement is not really that pronounced, and the reason why that is happening is because we every time we trigger a note, the phase of the sound, and the phase means where in this waveform it starts playing when you trigger the note. Because we have the random knob here set to all the way to the right, it's gonna pick a random position in this waveform to start the sound when you press a note. So when we bring this down, you can see it narrows down that range. And if it's all the way down, then we can make sure that the phase of the sound, it starts at exactly the same position every time we trigger a note. And that also means that the detuning, the phase cancellation that is created by the detuning, which in the end creates movement, is going to be exactly the same every single time as well. Now I also like to bring the phase knob down, so it basically starts at the start of the waveform, and now we should already have a little bit of a different sound. It's not that different, but we can hear now that every note sounds pretty similar to the one before. It's not like the phase starts every single time on different positions all the time, and therefore the movement changes. It now, well, is the same every single time. And now I want to go to the global tab, and another way how we can really bring out the movement is by bringing the stereo width down. And what that is going to do, it's going to make it mono, and if we bring it all the way down, you can now hear the movement much better. Especially on these higher notes. So if I just, let's just loop this higher note, you can really hear the movement. And I can also loop this note, and that way you can really hear the movement. Now let me just create another MIDI clip where we have a long note. So you can really hear the movement. By playing with the detuning amount, we can now change the timing or the speed of that movement. I find around there sounds pretty good. We have no stereo width right now, so what I like to do is bring that width up just a little bit, maybe up to 10. Somewhere between 10 and 20 sounds right. We still get a little bit of stereo width, but we hear that clear wobbling sound, that clear oscillation because of the detuning. Now, the next thing what we need to do is we can add a low pass filter. And I like to just set it so it's just rolling off the high end a little bit. Next thing what we can do is we can spice this up a little bit with some FM. So what I like to do is go in here and choose one of these waveforms. Now I'm just gonna pick the top one, and we can play with this maybe. And let's just set FM from B, and I'm gonna bring it up maybe to 25%. I'm gonna bring the random phase down as well for this one. Set the phase knob all the way to the left. You can hear what it's doing. Just gonna do it really subtle. I don't want to change too much to the sound. Maybe if we bring it down an octave. Just changes the sound ever so slightly. Next thing, I want to add a little bit of noise, and I like to go for one of these high passed ones. Let's do the high passed chorus. And let's run it through the noise, through the filter as well. So we actually have the low pass filter affecting the noise oscillator as well, and that's something. Well, I always do, because otherwise it just sounds like a piece of noise on top of your sound. See, it just sounds like there's some noise stacked on your sound, on your bass sound, and when you run through the filter, it sounds more like it's part of the bass sound itself, and I think that's really important. Next up, we can add a little bit of modulation to the filter if we want. We can do that with an LFO. Now I like to do set the LFO to trigger, so it's gonna be triggering this pattern every time a note is being played. Maybe it would be wise to not do any movement on the filter and just do some additional movement with other filters later on. Let's try out adding some distortion I'm going to go to the distortion, and what we can do here is we can go into the X shaper, bring the drive all the way to the left, and what that's going to mean, well, this drive knob now is pretty much a blend between the edit A button, so this particular shape, and the shape in edit B. So we're just going to use one of them, and I'm going to create a point here and just going to play around with it a little bit. So that already makes a big change. Now, one thing I notice, we have these notes which are pretty much all touching each other, and I don't really think that sounds good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all these notes, and I don't need the notes here at the top, I just need these bottom notes, and I'm going to just make them a slight bit shorter. That sounds pretty good. Now, in the effects section, we can also add a little bit of the hyper dimension, just to add a slight amount of more stereo width. Let's set the retrigger so it's exactly the same every single time. That widens the sound up a little bit. Next thing up, I like to add a chorus, and inside the chorus you can actually you can define which part of the sound you're adding the chorus to. So if I bring the mix all the way up, we can really hear it. So that's what the chorus is doing. Now that doesn't necessarily sound good. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to sync this to the BPM. I'm going to set it to a rate, let's say 4 bars. That already changes it, but it still sounds, well, it sounds rubbish. It doesn't sound good at all. Now, you can set the range with this depth control, and bringing that down will make it more usable. So if you bring that to somewhere halfway maybe, you can hear it's already more usable, but it still sounds a little bit weird. Now you can see here we have a filter, and it's called low pass filter. And this filter does exactly what it is, it's just a low pass filter. So if you bring it down, you can hear that we have less high frequencies. But the cool thing is we can actually click this, and now it's a high pass filter. So now the chorus is being added to the high frequencies, and we can use this to specify how much frequencies we want to add the chorus to. So if we bring it all the way down, it's just going to add it to the entire sound. And if we bring this up, we can just add the chorus to the high frequencies. And now we can use the mix knob to blend it back in with the original sound. So that just gives a little bit of a washier sound to the high frequencies, and that's something I think is really important when you're going to distort sounds. Because if you're just going to distort the sound, it's going to sound really raspy or crispy or crunchy, and it sometimes can be good, but I think it should be a little bit more distorted and sometimes a bit more noisy, and you can do that with a chorus. So we can also do that, maybe add a phaser, do the same thing, maybe 4 bars, bring the depth down a bit, and I don't know, maybe bring the feedback down a lot and just blend that in slightly. That's just gonna make a slight change. Now, one final thing I want to do is I want to create some movement. So we are going to add a notch filter, and we can do a single notch or 2 notches. Let's do 2 to make it special, and we're gonna set this to a different LFO. I'm gonna set this to a 8 bar rate, I think. 8 bar or 4 bars could work. Let's try 4, and set that to the cutoff knob here. And right now the LFO is triggering each time we play a note, and I don't want that, so I'm going to click the off button, and that means that it's now going to cycle through the LFO while the sound's playing, and it's going to look at where in the arrangement it starts playing. So it will always sound the same, pretty much. But it just doesn't sound the same on every single note that we trigger, but every time we play this section, it sounds exactly the same. That's pretty much what it's doing. you can see what it's doing right now. So we need to tweak this a little bit. Let's move this up a lot, and let's bring that range to a negative value so it goes down. I'm going to bring that resonance up as well. And now we have another notch filter right here, so I can set this to maybe somewhere halfway and do another LFO modulation on that one. That's just going to add a little bit more movement. Now, I'm not too sure about this FM. I get a little bit of a weird sound. Let's add a warp mode to this. Let's try the mirror. That sounds pretty interesting. Next up, I wanna emphasize every start of a note, and how you can do that is you can use an envelope. Now I'm going to use envelope number 2, and we're gonna bring the sustain all the way down, and we're gonna bring the decay to something pretty low. The attack is gonna be all the way down as well. Now I'm gonna go into the matrix, and I'm gonna assign LFO number 2 to the global master tuning, and that is basically the pitch of the entire synthesizer. Now in the global tab you can turn on this particular setting, which is called double click for typable values on controls. So you assign that, so you enable that, then we go back to the matrix, and if we double click this here, we can now type in a value. And the greatest thing about it is if we do 24 semitones, so we do 24 ST, and we click enter, it now changes it to the value of 19. So that's the value, well, that value is equivalent to 24 semitones. Now, this LFO, or this envelope, controls the pitch of this sound. And I like that. I just don't like that it also happens on this note. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make these two notes overlap, and I'm gonna do the same thing right here. That means that these notes are now gonna have to bend into each other, and therefore we have to set up Serum to do that. So let's go into Serum, and right here in the voicing tab I'm gonna click mono, and I'm gonna click legato, and then I can use the portamento time right here to change how fast that glide is going to be. So let's start with 100 milliseconds. That sounds okay. Let's close that down for a little bit. I think it would be nice if we just do the same thing here, so that these notes glide into those higher notes, so we don't get that pitch. We don't get the pitch envelope sound on the start of these higher notes, because they sound a little bit weird with the pitch movement on it, because they're already pretty high in pitch. See, that sounds good. We can now play with this one, and we can do that on maybe the high note, so that we can clearly hear the movement of the Reese. And let's bring this down a bit. So that sounds pretty good already. What you would do next is in here we have, maybe it would be good to add a compressor, and let's use the Multiband compressor mode. And I'm gonna turn the drums off for now. So this really adds, it really levels out the frequency bands, and we now pretty much have the same level for the low end, for the mid-range, and for the bass. Now we can use these sliders in here to really change the sound, and let's just see how it sounded before and this after. Now we can use the mix value here to blend some of the original sound back in. I like what we got. Let's add an EQ so we can slightly work on the sound a bit. I'm going to low pass it slightly so we get rid of that little bit of a clicky sound. Now I'm listening on headphones and I can clearly hear a little bit of a weird sound on the tail of every note, and it's a really high-pitched clicky sound. So if I just low pass that, we can pretty much get rid of it. Next thing what I want to do is maybe take out a little bit of mid frequencies, and then we're gonna go into, let's add a filter first, and I'm gonna do a notch filter, and this one is just gonna sweep through on a pretty slow rate. Let's try 2 bars, which is slightly different from what we did in Serum, so it just adds a slightly different speed of modulation. And that already gave it a much more interesting sound. And let's just go into Isotope Trash and distort this another time. The Isotope Trash is my go-to distortion. I think it's a really great plugin if you want to get a good distortion that is really complete and is gonna allow you to basically make any kind of distortion. Then Isotope Trash is probably your main one to look at. Now, in a way, Isotope Trash is simply a wave shaper right here. This window is a wave shaper, and what I like to do is that you can just draw in here, just like I done earlier inside Serum. And it might get a little bit small here because you are dealing with this, well, this window right here, and you're only working in this top right box for now. You can go into other boxes if you want, like that, but you're usually only working in this top right box, and you can zoom in on that by clicking this button. So you see this thing here, that's just the zoom, and the middle one just zooms out again. Let's go to the top right, and now we can create a distortion. Now you can see that this slider right here it pretty much smoothens the waveform, or it smoothens the shape of the wave shaper, and that kind of like sounds like it's low passing the distorted sound. And that is just because right now, if I bring it all the way to the left, we have really sharp edges here with these points, and as soon as I start bringing this up, you can see that it is rounding off the edges, and that pretty much acts like a low pass. Any of these sharp edges will create a lot of upper harmonics, a lot of higher frequencies, and by rounding them off, you're creating less of those high frequencies. So that's a really neat feature. And you have another one of these sliders here that controls the bending of, the bend of all of these lines. So you can change, if you bring it up, it makes the sound louder. If you bring it down, it makes it quieter, pretty much. So that is already sounding pretty good. Now, I'm going to do one final Isotope Trash, I think. We can also play around with this detune amount. Let's bring it down a little bit lower. So I've set the pitch bend amount now, and I can definitely hear that I like it on the 0.27 detuning amount. That sounded much better on the end here, on the last note. But you can see that I've set up a pitch bend range now of 12 semitones going up and 12 semitones going down. And that is going to allow us to add a little bit of movement on some of these notes maybe. So let's try adding a slight pitch bend to this one. So there we have a little bit of a different sound. Just changes it up slightly, and I find that adding pitch bend really adds to getting that neuro sound that a lot of people are looking for. And we can try something on the last one. So there you have it. That's how you can create a pretty simple but still pretty interesting Respace. Now I would go in and process this further and really start working on the sound itself, adding other filters, maybe adding more distortion or saturation. We could go and split this up in multiple frequency bands and process each band differently. You can go a lot of ways, but this is a good starting point for a solid drum and bass. And I can show you what you can do with it if I play a little bit on my keyboard. So I'm gonna basically just do this so you can probably see the notes light up here on the left side. But I'm just gonna play a few notes, and that's gonna give you a really, well, a good demonstration of what you can do with a sound like this. There you have it.